right, so welcome to the monthly business mixer. So today, obviously, it's the focus is creatives in the workplace. Really excited for you to hear from just a great group of panelists. We believe that each one of us are made in God's image, and we're uniquely and wonderfully made, as the psalmist says. And so we get a great opportunity to hear from 6 individuals that are very unique in how they've approached the creative space. But before we get started, to introduce you to those 6 unique individuals, I want to introduce some of you, most of you know him, but some don't, is a unique individual, Mark Foreman. So come over here, Mark. Yeah. So reason I asked Mark to come up here, one is to introduce him for those of you who don't know who he is. Mark is our senior pastor here. And question I had for you, Mark, is maybe walk us through kind of your beginnings, even before coming to the Lord.
Oh, wow.
You know?
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Are we, there we are. I wear 2 hats. I run a nonprofit called a church, which has, as you know, a business side to it, and a lot of organization, a lot of stuff go behind the scenes. But I'm actually a creative, played in bands and dabbled in art, and I've always known that the poets are the ones that are on the forefront of changing culture. Philosophers and poets are always the first ones, and then business is usually back here. But the poets know that to stay alive, they need business. Someone needs to buy your paintings, and business people know that they need creatives, because creatives are always thinking. They're the R&D section of the world that are imagining, creating, inventing. And it's been interesting for me to study history to see how those 2 things go together, like a horse and carriage, and I think that's what this is about. One of the things that oftentimes people don't think about is that God is a creative. You know, when I wasn't raised a Christian, and there were a lot of, I speak about this in my message today, there was a lot of hurdles for me to get over in terms of how I had stereotyped Christians, and one of them was the image I had of God as kind of this this divine prosecutor of the world. It's really hard to cuddle up to a judge and say, okay, let's do this thing. And one of the things that helped me along the way, once I did give my life to Jesus, was to read the first chapter of the Bible, which expresses God as a creative. There is nothing about judgment, there's nothing about ethics, there's nothing about morality. In the first chapter, it's all about God being the great, capital A, artist, who imagines and says, let there be, and there was. And that's a power that we as creatives don't have. We need some medium to create. But God was able to imagine and say, let there be, and there was. And that attracted me to God as an artist. He even worked so hard the first 6 days, he rested on the 7th day. And so what he instituted was art, and then he made us in his image. And so we are all artists. I think that every human being has the capacity to be an artist, but some are nurtured in that and more than others. And then this subject here, I'm so fascinated because I've actually read the interface of business and art throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and to see how challenging it was for really great artists to realize, okay, I can't just do what I want to do. I'm Michelangelo, and the Pope wants me to do the Sistine Chapel. And to pay the rent, I need to do the Sistine Chapel to go create David over here or Moses that I want to sculpt. And I think that's, and Bach was the same way in Germany as he was this great organist and great Baroque artist, he had to sometimes, make his music popular so that he could do what he really wanted to do. And I think all of us creatives struggle with that. I even, as a creative on stage, struggle with that as a preacher, because it's every weekend. It's a piece of art for me. And I'm kind of like Mozart, that I would say there are neither too many nor too few notes. I prepared this just the way it needs to be prepared, but I'm only given 40 minutes. And at heart, I'm a professor, so I want to share a lot more than I can do, but I have to make it a little more pop and accessible, and reduce it down to whatever the musicians would say, whatever the radio station is wanting. That's what I have to do with my song, and I have to do the same thing with sermons. So it's a very much a yin-yang symbiotic thing that goes on between business and art. And Jeff, I'm just so thrilled. I mean, this is a piece of art right here. In the church, having people from the church and outside the church just celebrating the mixture of these two. And can we give it up for Jeff for putting this on?
Thanks, Mark.
Am I good?
There you go. You're released. Thanks, Mark. Awesome. So before we get started, what we try to do is, in our mixer, is give you an opportunity to get to know those around you. So what I want you to do for the next couple minutes, I want you to find someone you don't know, and I want you to find out as many facts as you can about that person, because you only got 2 minutes. Ready? Go. Guys, we have a few announcements. Everyone welcome Steph. Steph is...
Hi, everyone.
Steph is my co-pilot, and she's responsible for this beautiful room and many more. So, Steph, you got a few things for us.
So speaking of the layout of this room, this would not be possible without the Bottom Line team, connectors. So we just wanted to say, if you're interested at all in being a part of the Bottom Line team and being a connector, a part of the setup, anything that our ministry needs, please come talk to me or anyone with a lanyard, and we would love to get you plugged in and involved. The second announcement is our next business mixer will be October 14th, and the topic is going to be Jeff and Eric Grupner, who's the COO of the San Diego Padres, and they're going to be talking about how to navigate in a really demanding work environment and also navigating a healthy family and church life. So we would love to get you signed up for that too. So both of those things right after the event. Thank you, everyone. Awesome.
Thanks, Steph. So, guys, before we get started here, just wanted to encourage you. We've said this a few times, but just try to make it simple for us to remember what type of environment this is, and it's meant to be. So, for those of you that are new to understand it, so think of it as ABC, right? So, A is all are welcome. Everyone's welcome. This is a business community without walls. You'll hear Mark, as our senior pastor, talk about we're a church without walls. This is a business community without walls, so everyone's welcome. So the B is, and I think this is critical because in business, right, the grind that we face on a daily basis and a weekly basis, it's never enough, right? There's always that sense, oh my gosh, we got the performance review coming up, or our company isn't doing as well. There's a level of stress. But here, the B stands for you can be in a safe place. This is a safe place. No one's judged here. No one. You're not judged in what you believe. You're not judged in what you don't believe. You're welcome. So again, all are welcome. You be in a safe place. And then finally, the C stands for just community connectivity with other business people. So this is an opportunity, right, on once a month, and we're going to continue that as we go into next year. We're going to have 9 mixers once a month. We're also going to have opportunities to get involved, which are called life investment groups. They're just 5 weeks of you meeting with other like-minded businessmen and women and walking through a study. It's just 5 weeks. I know business people start shaking after 5, so it's going to be 5 weeks. Then there's also opportunities for mentorship. So let's say if you're you're either maybe stuck in your career, or you need visibility as to how I can get to the next step, there's going to be a 3-week mentoring opportunity for you to sign up for, to say, you know what, I think I do some good by having some good mentorship. The mentorship's not a Bible study. The mentorship is just a Christian man or a Christian woman walking you through maybe some of your blind spots, maybe some opportunities for you to grow in your skill set. So that's what it is. It's true mentorship. And then finally is we're going to have a fairly large-scale event coming in May 15th. It's going to be centered around business excellence. So being excellent at what we do. It's called Invade. So more is coming on that. It's going to be more of a TED Talk style. So we're going to have multiple speakers, multiple panelists, 8 minutes at a time. So you're not going to be, someone's not coming to give you a 90-minute speech. They're going to be very quick and very to the point, focusing around excellence in business. And we're talking about all aspects of business. So whether it's you're managing P&L, you're in financial services, you're a mortgage broker, you're a real estate agent, you're a creative, you're a musician, there's going to be many different speakers that are going to be here. So really looking forward to that, which is May 15th. So again, it's a community of connectivity with like-minded individuals. So ABC, all are welcome. You can become a part of a safe place. No one's judged here. And then really fostering that community. So with that, as we go into our fourth subject today on creatives in the workplace, this is not necessarily an opportunity to be entertained, or we don't focus on subjects to say, well, we hope you're entertained by it, but it's an opportunity for us to see how individuals, especially on the creative side, how they navigate, how they think. I think of an organization that I was a part of for many years, right? We always think through that. Many organizations have cultures that are embracing creatives. Others don't understand creatives. But what we can say, and especially businesses that are driving particular products, whether it's consumer goods, even all the way down to vitamins, medicines, and so forth, is that they're looking for innovation. Innovation is critical and key to any and every organization. We all know that because that impacts the overall P&L. But what do you do with these creatives? So think of this. Sometimes they're given the big task of saying, okay, innovation has to come from your department, make it happen. And oh, by the way, it's got to be at this price. And oh, by the way, no, you need to slide that. And oh, by the way, we need it this quickly. And oh, by the way, and all of a sudden you give a creative that much space to work in. That's not very inspiring, is it, as a creative? But it's those organizations that can say holistically, how are we going to support not just our creative, but it's more holistically as an organization, do we believe in innovation? So that supply chain's on board and operations on board, the CFO's on board, and all aspects of the business are on board. I love, and I think I shared this in the last one, I love what Steve Jobs said as it relates to Apple. Apple was created basically in an innovation. He felt that innovation was making something for the consumer that they don't even know they need yet. So pretty powerful, right? So with that, what I'd like to do now is welcome up our panelists. So if our panelists can make their way up, let's give them a hand here. So as we talked about earlier on, and we just touched on slightly, was what I found in both my career as well as relationships is that we're all made, right? We're all fearfully and wonderfully made, as the psalmist says. However, when it comes to creatives, all come from a very unique place. It's not as if they all have the same beat, as far as they don't walk to the same beat, right? So as we look at 6 panelists here, they're all coming from a different place of creative. So that's why I'm so excited to have you here as to how they navigate and how they thought through even some challenges and obstacles that they both have faced, continue to face, and how do they continue to stay inspired, right, as a creative. So first, I want to welcome Chris Telfer. Chris owns a creative agency and has about 30 employees, Chris, is it right now?
23.
Okay, 23 employees kind of spread out both between here, Colorado, Seattle, and that zone. So let's welcome Chris Telfer. Yeah. So Kelly Redfield. So Kelly was the co-founder of Darling Magazine, which is, won't spoil it too much for those of you that aren't familiar with Darling, but Darling is well known within the millennial generation, especially in trying to bring more fashion and lifestyle in a more eloquent, godly manner without being Christianese in its messaging. So let's welcome Kelly Redfield. So Andy Powers. So Andy Powers is lead designer of Taylor Guitars, and knowing Andy when he was a little guy, and actually his dad gave me a long story about how he met my dad in the early '70s, but that's a different conversation. But anyways, let's welcome Andy Powers. So Aaron Chang, world-renowned photographer, as well as gallery owner. I didn't say this to Aaron earlier, but I know this will embarrass him, so I need to say it in front of all of you. And Aaron was like a god to me as growing up as a kid. Aaron was just, his storytelling through imagery in the 80s was just incredibly impactful as you would just look at surf photography and the places that he would go and navigate, definitely on the forefront of surf exploration. So really excited to hear from Aaron. So let's welcome Aaron. And yes, we have a millennial on the panel. And it's not Jung. So I'd like to welcome Sarah Randall. So Sarah owns a business, Wood and Ivory, and runs a music school and very passionate about music, but also does other things outside of music, from blogging, and finds other areas to find inspiration. So very excited to hear from Sarah. So let's welcome Sarah. Jung, many of you know, for those of you that are new to this environment, so Jung is our creative director here. Some of you might assume that we're going to be talking about worship when we're actually not. Jung's going to take us into a different area. His background, obviously, he's a creative from doing a lot of graphic art and doing other things outside of just playing worship. So I think sometimes you think, oh, he's just the worship guy. He just woke up and at 16, he started playing worship. That's not the case with Jung. So really excited to hear kind of Jung's journey as a creative. So let's go ahead and welcome Jung. All right. So first off, let's start down at the end here with Chris. So Chris, as you start thinking through, right, kind of where you're at today, right? So there was no golden parachute. There was nobody, no rich uncle that gave you a position, started you off. Maybe talk to us kind of how you got started just as a young gun and just needing that creative outlet and how that began in your life.
Yeah, totally. So first off, we were talking and praying earlier, preparing to come in here, and Jeff said it when he asked a number of panelists to come on stage, they say, why me, right? And so, which is kind of a common theme. And my story is a lot of why not me, right? Why not me? Why can't I do that? And so I grew up with parents that were hustlers, right? My mom cleaned hotel rooms, and my dad was a mailman and did tree businesses on the side, and they managed apartment complexes, and my grandfather ran a garage. So I grew up with that energy, that hustle, you know, like, mijo, come inside and help me get the money, or, you know, help me change the oil, right? You know, and so I'm like, okay.
There was no drug transaction there when you said that, so.
Yeah. You know, that we know of it, but realistically, I grew up with that creative energy, and I grew up in Colorado, and so you want to make money when it snows, you go hustle, right? You go shovel the walks. And so my parents instilled me with that energy. My dad was incredibly creative. He was always in the woodshed, and he was really, really good crafting different things. So I grew up with that, which basically meant that I'd have to just sand things. You know, come here, son, let's sand this. I'm like, oh, God, right? But I grew up with that. So when I went to university, I was struggling a lot with my identity because I was a creative, a musician, but I also loved to figure out creative kind of solutions to solve problems, and I liked to hustle. And so I was struggling. In college, it's a really hard place to say, who are you? You need to declare a major now, right? And then be in debt for the rest of your life, right? And so I picked up every job I could. I was a rock climbing instructor. I worked at the computer lab. I worked for the editorial newspaper and shot photography and told stories. I needed both the creative world And I also needed the business world, if you were. So I double majored. I said, screw it, I'm just going to do 2 majors, right? And so I majored in applied mathematics and physics and journalism. And so my parents were like, are you crazy, right? And then later I became a believer, and I found my identity in Christ. And I did a trip called the World Race where we did documentaries. I met the love of my life. And I learned that I was evenly weighted left brain and right brain. I tried to come over here into the right brain space, and it didn't fully satisfy me. And I went into the left brain side, and it didn't fully satisfy. And I learned that for me, uniquely, I was split down the middle. And I could have, I could understand the creative side, and I could also understand the business side of the fact that, hey, we're running a business, we need to be profitable, right? And if we're not profitable, you don't have a job, right? But at the same time, too, the business world needs the creative. And so I didn't listen again, and I ran into the agency world and was like, for the love of God, can we meet a deadline, right? And then I full well went into the consulting world. I had our daughter, and that scares the heck out of you as a dad. I'm like, I need to make the money, right? And so I went into the consulting world, and I was like, wow, it's real stale here. They need the creativity. They need creative storytellers and creative solutions to solve problems. So I was looking for the right home. So I said, screw it, I can't find it. Let's start our own. And so my wife and I sat down and with a glass of wine on New Year's Eve, and we named our business, and we soft launched it, and that's what became our business today. And so it over the time was just a real kind of back and forth of trying to find that. So yeah. Love it. Yeah.
Kelly, let's talk about this is died.
Talk loud.
Kelly, let's talk about for you in your makeup, right? So let's think of it as we would consider you maybe like the ultra creative. So the passion and following the vision, and and you were in Arizona, right? And you felt that, hey, in order for me to really experience what I want to experience, I got to move. I've got to go to LA. Yeah. So maybe talk about it. Talk to us. Because there was no golden parachute for you. No one setting you up. No one preparing you.
Hello. Okay. So yeah, as he said, my parents moved me to Arizona, which is dehydrating in a lot of ways. I felt dehydrated creatively, but I can't say that I knew that I was creative because I moved there when I was 10. So I kind of took on this role of everything that I wasn't. It was very difficult. I struggled with a lot of mental health issues, just getting to the point of getting on a volleyball team, getting a scholarship, and getting to the ocean. So the day I could move, I did, and I just racked up all the student debt that we all do nowadays. And in college, I found that there were a lot of lost young women, myself included, to be honest. And so in that observing and ultra creative kind of stirring in my heart, I realized, whoa, I'm trying to be extroverted. I'm trying to be all these things that college tells you want to be. I'm really introverted. I have this creative side that I've never explored. What does this look like? And so that led me, and I'll tell more about it in the future, but that led me to starting a women's magazine. And then as I've grown, I've become a mom, and I also help creative direct for the magazine that you'll see in the coffee shop, Nations.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Kelly. You bet. So Andy, maybe walk us through when your journey began as a young guy. I think you were talking about the ages between 5 and 7 when you recognized that you needed a creative outlet.
I'm not sure I'd call it recognition. It was more of a series of mistakes. Most of, in a lot of ways, I feel a little like Mr. Magoo, kind of you sort of just wind up where you end up. My dad's a carpenter. Very good one. And growing up, there was a lot of music in my house. Both my parents are hobbyist musicians, and I'd gotten into music. I was playing piano, but I really loved guitars. And one day, my dad brought home a scrap of wood that was big enough to cut a guitar shape. So I thought, I'm going to build a guitar. That's great. That's a great thing to do. And so I worked on it, day after day. And it wasn't really a guitar. It was more like a guitar-shaped object. And my sweet mom, she drove me down to the local music shop, and I begged for 6 mismatched tuning keys and a used set of strings. I kind of got this thing together, and I tried putting the strings on, and it literally just exploded into a pile of splinters. All right, so, I'm standing in the garage, and at the time I was 7 or 8 years old, something like that, and I was crying over this thing that I'd tried to build, and it broke. I went, that was almost like there was a firecracker inside. That's kind of awesome. And so I was curious enough to try it again when my dad brought home another big scrap of wood, and that one broke too. And eventually they started to hold together. And so that's kind of what I ended up doing. Is I really loved these. I loved these instruments. I loved the songs that you can play on them. I loved that I was doing this thing that allowed you to just keep making something beautiful. And so I ended up doing a lot of repairs and restoration work for all the local music shops. So when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, my mom would drive me around to all the local music stores, and all the broken instruments that they couldn't fix, I'd take them all in and take them back to my mom and dad's garage, and I'd fix them all and then drive them back, or my mom would take me and I'd drive them back. And so I made another mistake, and I got a letter from the IRS one day. I want to say I was about 13 at the time. And so I go in the house and I show this to my dad. I'm like, "Pops, what's this mean?" He starts laughing because he'd been running his small construction business since longer than I've been around. He goes, "Well, it means that you made a little too much money and somebody noticed." And so kind of my first real business lesson was that I went out to the county recorder's office or the clerk's office and showed him this letter, and the guy was leaning over the counter at me, looking down, and goes, "Well, kid, you got yourself a problem. Because you're not legally old enough to work, but you better figure out how to pay your taxes. So you better figure this out. I'm not sure there's much I can do to help you." And so I kind of, I eventually got that figured out. But all I've really done ever, even the time I went to college to study music, because I wasn't a great student. I graduated high school when I was maybe 15 or 16 and started going to a community college. But I had a scholarship to study music, so I did. And I spent most of my time building and selling guitars to my professors and classmates. And about the time when a lot of my friends are finishing school and kind of figuring out what to do in life, some of them are going off on tour or getting a job in the coffee shop or whatever, I thought, well, this is kind of weird. I mean, I've been in business for more than 10 years now. And all of my bills are paid. And at the time, I had a several-year waiting list for work. So I can't stop this even if I wanted to. But mostly I really love doing this. I guess this is kind of a job. So building guitars and playing music is kind of all I've ever really done.
Good deal. Thanks for sharing, Eddie. You bet. Aaron's just shaking his head. So
Can I comment, first of all? Those three were insane.
It's possible.
Imagine having a tax problem at 13. Since we're talking about business, I chose photography. I didn't even pay taxes till I was 28.
I'm jealous.
Is that on record? So, Aaron, walk us through kind of your journey, right? As you mentioned to me that it was important to you as it relates to being a business person within the creative world, that it's important for you to be diversified. Maybe walk us through that. Why is it important for you to be diversified in your business of creativity? And maybe walk us through the areas that you hone in on beyond just photography.
Well, as I said, I'm a photographer, and I think the only thing harder, young, is to be a rock star than a photographer. It is legitimately the second hardest profession you could choose. So when you start out, you have to basically hustle. You know, it's such a hustle. And the one thing that I learned through mowing grass, so this is how good I am at business. I had two friends. We said, well, let's mow lawns. Okay, how much are we going to charge? Let's charge $1. Okay. That's how good I am at business. So anyway, as I wanted to be a surfer, my cousin in Hawaii, I moved to Hawaii at 17 to be a surfer. My cousin said, well, that's great. You need a job. And I'm like, oh, yeah. And so she got me a job photographing tourists going to luau's in Waikiki.
We're going to fast forward to junior high. Was kind of the first time I understood this feeling of I was practicing my guitar in my room for hours a day. And I just remember my friend finally heard something that I was playing and said, hey, the guy who cuts my hair has this this band thing that he's doing. And I remember thinking, I'm 13, how old is this guy? And he was like 30-something years old. But for some reason, people were handing me music all the time to listen to, and one of the bands was Rush. And for me, yeah. So, but that music was even long before I was even born, you know. So these guys were super surprised that this 13-year-old kid knew Rush songs. You know, I'm like hours in there studying every note, everything that I could get out of it. And one day, after the haircuts happened in that barber shop, I finally had the courage enough to go and play with these guys. And that was the first time I played live, like in a band situation. And I think something came alive in me then, and it was a 13-year-old kid playing guitar with like a 30-year-old drummer and like a 40-year-old guitar player playing Rush songs. And so that was kind of but what I remember the most looking back is how scared I was that it was so much more comfortable to play for 3 hours to myself in my room. And that risk that I took was the first time I realized this could be for me.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing, John. You bet.
Well, first off, a couple things. Someone said earlier that we all have creativity inside of us. And so when we even chose the name Red Door Collaborative, there's a collaboration that happens between the client and the creative, and we're all in it together, collaborating and creating. And so sometimes when we use the word creative, it's like us and them, right? Like that creative. We're all creative, just in different ways. And so to kind of back up before I get to step one, I have a really solid relationship with my creative team. I'm a creative myself. So building a strong relationship with those creatives, setting them up for success. The people are the heart of my company. And it's really important for them to know that I have their back in these projects, right? But typically, when a project will start, the first thing I always say is boundaries create freedom, right? And so how many creatives are in here? Raise your hands. Okay, awesome. So how many have you had the phrase, just be creative, right? From the client, and you're thinking, okay, yeah, sure, right? Like, what does that mean? And so it's my job to meet with the client and draw out their vision and their expectation. And what I'm doing is I'm framing that world and helping set up my creative for success. So first off, I never ever commit to a timeline, even if I'm pressured by the client. And sometimes I'll have to awkwardly laugh for like a half an hour, like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna meet with my team and call you back. Yeah, I'm gonna meet with my team and then call you back. I'm gonna meet with my team. and then I'm going to call you back, right? So never ever commit to that timeline. What I do is I want to give my creatives a voice in the process. That's incredibly important. I'm not dictating the project like this is what you have to do. You are collaborating this process. So sometimes there are hard schedules. You know, I need this done in 4 weeks. I have a presentation or there's something going on and there's a hard deadline. But I'll sit down with my creative team and the budget and the project, all of that will dictate what's possible. Sometimes I have to bring the client from the moon back to Earth, right? They're like, they want production of, you know, the Avengers movie. And I'm like, that's awesome, but you have $5,000. You know what I mean? Or vice versa, or you have a week. And so I give the creatives a voice, and we work that out. They say, I need 2 weeks. I'll say, hey, we have 1. We'll meet in the middle. They know I have their back, right? And then I'll go back to the client, and I'll kind of frame out those boundaries as well. But what I'm doing is, when a client says, just be creative, they're saying they have no expectations. And we all know that's not true. At the end, they have tons of expectations. So it's my job to draw that out and honor the creative team, but it also honors the client as well. I work out a pretty rigorous work back schedule that buffers in that time that we need, which is good. But it honors both parties in that process. To get rid of that, just be creative. I think the other part that is difficult is, as Jeff is saying, those two creatives, like how do I draw out of them? Well, inspiration is just one way to be motivated. And what do you do when the winds of inspiration stop and you're in the doldrums of a project or a season? And so what do you do there? Well, there's different ways to fuel yourself as a creative. It's not my job to inspire you, right? That's your job. My job is to set you up for success and give you the environment, right? Are your creatives in the corner in some cubicles? Probably not a good place for those creatives, right? But connecting with them, building a relationship. But creativity, what we're creating in the end, is awesome. But there's also projects where you'll have an amazing budget, but you're not so stoked on the work. Or you're stoked on the work, but the budget's crap, right? Creatives have a camaraderie on how we can be creative problem solvers. And a lot of times there's projects that we do later we'll look at and we'll say, dude, look at what we did with nothing. And there's this camaraderie that happens and this motivation to say, hey guys, I know you're not inspired about this project, but we have an opportunity to change the landscape here, right? And experience is more important than product. And so I've had projects where we've done the best job ever, but maybe we didn't manage the process so well, and so it taints the art, right? And then I've had other jobs where we walk through and we made it about the experience and the client, and maybe it wasn't the brand or the thing that we wanted to work on, but the client is elated. And so at the end of the day, everything we're doing is to build relationship and story and to bring something and change the landscape. And that in itself is a motivator, right? And so I think a lot of it is there's more than just the inspiration element. The mountaintop is awesome, but you can't live there, right? In Colorado, we have a saying, you get to the top, you're halfway there. And so, and a lot of times I feel like, too, you can look at a lot of the people on this panel and say, oh, man, how did they get there? And as Aaron said right now, he's hustling. I am, too. I was like, yeah, I have 3 projects right now, right? And my wife's always like, how are you going to do that, you know? And I'm always thinking, like, you know, I'll be like, oh, I get it done. And then at night when I'm like, I don't know, you know? Like, I don't know how I'm going to do it. But I know that the creative process is very much that. It's a process. Right, and so it's taking care and managing that. And a lot of you guys too are independent contractors, and so you're going to have to wear multiple hats. And so I'll say this one final thing, and I'll be done. Someone asked earlier, when you started your business, were you afraid? And it's like, yeah, I was afraid, right? But for me, I had to work another job and get those scales to where I finally had to get to a point to say it's time to take a risk now. Right? And then I had to trust the Lord, you know. In Isaiah, it says the voice doesn't come to the left or right, it comes from behind you. So it's not in front of me. So that means I have to be walking. I have to take that step of faith first. And then, so it's not just about the path that's being lit up, but who do you want to be? Who are you in that process? And so for me, when we took that step, it's still scary. There's still jobs where I say, okay, why not me? And then I get it and I'm like, oh no. Like, will I do a good job, right? But a lot of it is setting up those creatives for success. And I believe a lot of that is setting those boundaries and taking care of your creative team or yourself in the process. So
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Chris. So Kelly, walk us through your journey with Darling, right? So both between the vision, what you were doing at the time, what you continue to do, your partner, and so forth. Maybe walk us through there.
Yeah, sure. So I kind of kept it high level on the first question because I really want you to understand that Darling came out of a place of hardship. And we came out of a time of feeling lost, insecure, maybe not feeling worthwhile. And we were not the only ones feeling this. And so the night that I got saved in college, I was super, super down. And I asked the Lord, I believe the things that you're telling me. I believe that you're true and right. But I feel as though I don't have a purpose in life. And if I'm going to walk this life with you, that you guarantee that we will live an adventurous life. Like, I need you to give me purpose. And as I prayed this prayer, I was given a vision of starting a magazine. I'm not kidding. That was my, wow. He answered my prayer immediately. And I thought to myself, what? How am I going to do this? I don't have any experience in business. I have just learned that I'm a creative person. I have all these majors I can't decide. Communications, English, children's poetry. I was all over the map. And so I met a girl that had a very specific focus, and she knew when I told her about this purpose that I had for lost women, young women specifically. She said, "I have the same purpose. Let's talk about it." And her name is Sarah Doubledam, and she's still currently the CEO and owner of Darling Magazine. I am just a co-founder. I no longer own it. But out of that place of hardship, we sought out every single person who knew about business, because I came from an insanely passionate creative space because I was just really exercising that side of myself now, realizing that there really is very little business to me. So you sound like a good boss. So I was just coming from a place of, wow, these dreams, these ideas. So Darling was really a baby for me. There was no fear for me in the creative process, because I felt that it was birthed from an honest relationship with the Lord. And I felt that from that moment forward, any step that I took, if it was a wrong step or a right step, would be guided. And I was welcoming closed doors and open doors with the same excitement, knowing that if God's going to do it, He is going to do it in an amazing, wonderful way. And so we ran into many, many issues. One being we both had student debt. So I had lots of jobs. I worked at Yahoo. I worked at FITM. I did some gigging, styling, things like that. Because I moved to LA because we thought that's where everybody goes to start their business. And it's just really expensive. You can start your business wherever you want. But we were surrounded by young, creative people. And in that process, we would just glean from every person that we met. And we would ask them, how do you start? How do you get an LLC? How do you start a corporation? What do you do? And so we actually found the name Darling. We were prayerful about it. We knew this was our job. We look on the copyrights, taken. We're like, oh gosh. But they haven't been doing it for 10 years, this publication. So we call him up and we're like, we are starting this magazine for women. It's going to change the world. Everyone thinks that. And he's like, yeah, well, I own the name, right? And we're like, okay. He's like, I'm not selling it. Okay, fine. We call him back. We're like, we think that you need to get us the name. It's Darling Magazine. It is Darling Magazine. We won't be publishing children's book, which is what it was at the time. And we talked about how we don't just believe that women are here. We believe that you're here with a purpose, a God-given purpose. And the burden that the women feel that are lost is a burden of purpose. You have a purpose. And you need to take that burden of purpose and turn it into a gift of purpose. And that is the main driving force in my creative life. So I was never scared to start Darling and to be a part of it, and even to eventually walk away from Darling, because I knew that that purpose will remain inside of me to continue to help and inspire young women to become just leaders, and honestly, to just really believe that they were created to do something. You don't have to be famous. If you have that drive in you, you can come alongside someone else who you really believe in and just really, become a Darling girl. And we felt that we had to become that person before we started it. And so I think that was the creative process for us. It took a while for us because we need to become people who believed that we had something to say. So that's
Awesome.
Darling. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelly. So Andy, your story is unique as well, because as you were starting your business at 5'6", most of us were digging holes and
I've done
playing
plenty
with
of that.
G.I. Joes. And when you were 13 and you were served by the IRS, most of us just had paper routes. So, back in the day when they were reading the newspaper. So maybe walk us through from your perspective, right? So you've got this ultra creative. So as a creative, you're looking at the passion and the drive, right? But then you have the reality of bringing it to life. How do you balance between the creative, right, the vision, the passion, and the reality of the work? How do you balance the creative and the actual work?
Well, I think I'd start by saying that I believe that we're all built in the image of a creative God. Kind of like Mark said earlier, a lot of times we think of the Almighty as, very Old Testament, very heavy-handed, a prosecutor, a judge. And no, you go back and you read the whole front part of the story. Like, if you're the type to just read the beginning and the end of a book, start with the beginning. You go, man, there is an unbelievable, unfathomable level of creativity here. And in the Bible, it says that God made all. So that means that there is nothing about which the Lord doesn't know everything. That is an unbelievably creative being whose image we are made in, right? So all of these creative things, everybody has this creative bent. And for a lot of artists, that's when we feel alive. When you're in the doing part, you're participating, you're in that moment a little more closely reflecting our Maker. And that's what we're called to do. So that's kind of where we come from. The flip side of that is what I'd call the work of art. We always think of like the finished piece as, well, that's a lovely chair, that's a work of art. Well, the work part, that was like the chop wood, carry water part of actually making that chair. We tend to think of creatives as very glamorous, very, real free thinking, and oftentimes it's really just put your head down and start working. It's like start digging ditches if you want to build a beautiful building. In the case of a guitar, okay, there's a whole lot of chopping wood that happens. You chop wood and you saw and you make sawdust. Oftentimes around the shop, we joke about being the last man sanding. Yeah, seriously. You do not want to know how many huge piles of sawdust I have made in my lifetime. It's obscene. But that's really the challenge for a lot of the creative sort is you have to actually follow through with doing the work. In fact, there was a furniture maker that I was fortunate to get to know and spend some time with named Sam Malouf. He was a very, very just extraordinary person in every way. And he'd laugh at all kinds of people would come from all over the world to visit with him and kind of study with him. And he'd kind of laugh and go, no, you're not feeling inspired? The best way to feel inspired is start working and the inspiration will come later. we learn by doing. You actually commit yourself to that process and follow it through. That's really where it comes from. And as Chris was mentioning, a lot of what is required is that, well, we do commerce within the business realm. And the currency that a lot of creative folks do their business with isn't necessarily dollars and cents. We often are doing our business with the currency of emotion, of feeling, of creativity, of encouragement. It's all these things that are really hard to convert into a SKU or a product. And so in order to do that, usually what we need to do is build boundaries around it. Sometimes those boundaries are a certain price bracket. Sometimes those boundaries are materials that are available or a time frame that's available to work in. So once you can put those around you, we have to stop looking at them as constraints or restrictions and more as parameters to help guide your design. So that's a real challenge for a lot of artists, is that, well, you actually have to do the work and follow through with it.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for sharing, Andy. You bet. So Aaron, like
Can I respond first?
you like responding to that side, right?
It's powerful stuff. I mean, I hope you guys appreciate how good this is. But I was thinking of the work and the fact that I've thrown out 1 million slides in my life. Slides are little pieces of film. I don't know if some of you don't know what they are. They used to cost 25 cents each. So if you think about 1 million times 25 cents in waste, that was part of my development. So that was my process.
Awesome. Good. So like Jung, you love being in front of people. So Aaron, if you can walk us through your creative journey, right? And when you are thinking through photography, right? And how that came about as a teenager who was extremely introverted and probably a lot more comfortable in being alone and being away or being maybe with one close friend. Walk us through that and what your creative journey became as a result of being introverted.
I grew up in an interesting house. My dad was Chinese, my mother was Scottish, and it created me, where I grew up in Imperial Beach, I was an outsider. There was nobody like me. And so I didn't really know who I was, and consequently became pretty introverted through my teen years. And it was interesting to me that I started to learn to do photographs in high school. It was an extra class. And it quickly evolved into a process of me taking an idea, putting it on a piece of photographic paper, putting it in front of people, and being able to talk to them without actually talking. That was very cathartic for my evolution, if that's the right English. I don't know. I'm a photographer. But it was during my senior year when I really decided to commit to photography. I did the yearbook class and the photography class, and it was in the yearbook class that I was quietly sitting in the back of the room watching the politics go on of the yearbook assembly. There was this woman, Wendy, who was running the show. She was a cheerleader and the homecoming queen and all this stuff. And the yearbook was going to be life at our high school according to Wendy. I was a surfer and and Mr. Counterculture guy. I listened to David Bowie and all this stuff that was just not normal. And I found out that I could actually influence the discussion by somehow only taking photos at the last minute and putting them on the table at the deadline that showed other people, the unspoken characters in the high school, all the loser surfer guys with their hoodies. I did a shot of all my friends, like 8 of them. All of us had hoodies and hair, long hair split down the middle. It was like a uniform for the loser group. Anyway, it was that kind of aha moment that I could actually speak to people with my pictures that I think put my path, provided the direction for my path. And it was during my formative years that I started to exercise this ability. I would do photography, and like I said, I started out, I'm not very talented. I just work my ass off to get here. But
Can we say that at church? Can we? I don't know.
Well, we all have one, and they're given to us by God. So we can work them however we want.
I was thinking donkey, so I thought,
Yeah.
anyways.
Anyway, but it was through that process of really kind of using my creative process to think of ways to influence people. And then it was, I fell in love with surfing when I was 9 years old. I'm done. That's me. I moved to Hawaii to be a surfer. And it was that passion for this funny sport that really started to drive my images. To me, it made sense to take a picture of a beautiful wave. I mean, what could be more pretty, And it's interesting because when I scroll back to my youth, I remember some very distinctive moments swimming around at Pipeline in Hawaii, watching all this stuff, not knowing God or understanding what God is, but recognizing there was something there, because I would get goosebumps watching these massive, beautiful waves. And then I wanted to communicate. I had a best friend who stayed behind in Imperial Beach, and I kept trying to shoot these photos and going, "Hey, Mikey, you want to come over here? Look at this." And that was part of what set my path down the surfing thing, but it also provided me with a way to surf all over the world on somebody else's dime, which this was before pro surfing, so I thought I was... Amazing plan. Yeah, it was a good plan, and it's a lot longer lifespan than a pro surfer, so it was a good choice. Well done. Thanks. But I think that this idea of using your creativity to speak to people, I heard recently that, everybody's a photographer. Is anybody in the room not shot a photo in their life? So, but the critical thing is, in any creative force, is you have to have something to say. And I think that's what makes you successful, is to really start to look at what you're trying to say, to understand how best to say it, to be fluent in your language, whether it's shaping wood or creating a magazine or a film, but to do it to the highest possible standards, because the higher the standard is, the more you're communicating and the bigger influence your art will have. But it all starts with one. For me, it was in high school, influencing a handful of people to having an international forum through the magazine world and speaking to a lot of people, and now through my art, speaking in a different way to people. But I think that the important thing is to find what it is you want to say, but do it as best you can. And the one beef that I have currently with the church is that for a long time, the church was the primary driver in the art world. If you do the history of art, you will see that through a significant period of modern history, the church was people of faith that was the primary benefactor and driver of the arts. And I think that it's now time to rise up again, and let's do that. So.
Cool. Thanks, Aaron. So guys, we only have about 2 minutes left. So real quick, in 30 seconds, Sarah, what would your challenge be if there's a creative out here, someone who maybe is in a 9-to-5, focusing on a means-to-end workplace to find their creative space? 30 seconds. What would you challenge them to do?
Well, I think first thing is really consider what will happen if you were to just go all out in your passion as a job, because there are sort of two sides to one coin. So on one hand, like, all of us are very fortunate that we get to do what we love for a job and make money from it, and I feel so lucky and so blessed. But like your relationship with your passion might change if you are in a 9-to-5 situation in that passion. So like, for example, for me, my typical day is, teaching 10 to 15 music lessons, no breaks. So the first thing I do when I get in the car is probably not going to be to turn on music, where 10 years ago, or when I was a teenager, definitely, that was a love, and it still is, but things can change a little bit. So yeah, just you might need to create new outlets, I guess, if you are doing what you love full time. It can change. So
Awesome. Thanks. Jung. Yep. Thanks, Sarah. We're going to end it with you, Jung. As you start thinking through, what about that creative that might be a little bit more introverted, might be challenged in looking for validation, but not really finding those outlets to be validated as a creative? What would your challenge be to that type of creative?
I would just say many of us are like the boy who is just playing guitar in his room. I think about all these. Everyone had such great feedback, and I think about the two words that I heard were risk, and the other one I heard was currency. So if you guys remember what Andy said about what our currency as a creative looks like, it looks different sometimes for all of us, and we're even trying to be creative with that. How we are filled. So number one, I would say, instead of becoming this risk assessor person, because a lot of times creativity and risk assessment is a huge part of where I lose myself. Is my wife would say, "You've written 100 songs, but how come no one's heard them?" And I just want to encourage you guys today that if you want to take that risk, if you're willing to take that risk to show people your heart, your story, tell your story, I think that can happen through music, it can happen through visual arts, through painting, through poetry, whatever your creative thing is. I would just say take the risk and know that, and as a receiver of that risk, just be gracious and encouraging. And I'm a person who also receives the creative's work, so I get to look at it and I get to assess whether or not it's going to be usable or not. So I would just, on both ends, I would just say be kind. Yeah. Just be kind. Yeah. It's your heart that is out there.
Awesome. You guys appreciate this? You bet. You bet. Thank you, panelists. Appreciate each one of you. Appreciate each of you for joining us today. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you were challenged. And I think the clear-cut message is, one, you're fearfully and wonderfully made, right? Now go. Go act. Take a step. So God bless you. We look forward to seeing you at the next Mixer. And maybe we'll just pray real quick before we go. Lord Jesus, thank you for today. Thank you that you're a creative God and that you're a God of wonder. And we want to honor you today. Thank you for these panelists and just what you're doing in their hearts and lives. And I pray for our business friends as we go out into the community tomorrow, that we may be a reflection of this God of wonder. And as Jung so eloquently said, may we be kind, may we be gentle, and may we just love those that are in front of us. Be with us, we pray. In Christ's name, amen. All right, have a great week.